she's going to be talking about hunt clubs.
Give a little intro blurb while we wait for the computer to get organised. So tonight I'm talking about the WA Hunt Club. And the reason I'm doing that is I was going through looking at the various sporting and recreational groups that used to meet at the Peninsula Hotel. And I wasn't surprised to find the cyclists or the athletes or the cricketers, but I was surprised to find the WA Hunt Club meeting there in the 1930s. You know, horses, hounds, riders. It seemed a very suburban place to be doing that. You know, right up to the railway station, a place that already had streets and cars and trams. It didn't seem like a good place to be bringing, horses and hounds, a pack of hounds and a good many horses too.
I'm surprised there were many foxes to chase as well.
Oh, well, you didn't always need a fox. But what I found,
even if the fox had a brown or grey fur and hopped.
But what I found when I started looking into this group is that they're very interesting, and they essentially were a suburban Perth hunt club. They hunted round the Perth suburbs throughout the 20th century. So it started a little bit late, finished a little bit early before the end of the century. But for most of the 20th century, this group are riding to hounds in Perth suburbs, which says a lot about the nature of the suburbs, doesn't it? Yeah. So, 9% complete. I think I'll keep talking. Okay, so when it comes up, you're going to see a picture of some rather splendid looking horsemen mounted on impressive grey horses, and another group of well-dressed huntsmen with a pack of hounds down near Canning Bridge, because that was another one of their regular meeting places. But what it won't show you, because the pictures are in black and white, is you won't really be able to see the colour of the coats, and you won't really be able to see too much detail of the hounds. And both of those things need a bit more explanation. But first of all, let's have a look at where the hunt club came from. Now, hunt clubs started quite early on in the eastern states. You know, in New South Wales and Victoria, they're there in the early 19th century. It's much, much later here in WA. And it starts when a man called Major Cairns Candy arrives at Fremantle with a pack of beagles. So about a year after he arrives with the beagles, they form the Fremantle Hunt Club. And guess who the first president of the Fremantle Hunt Club is? No, it's C.Y. O'Connor. In these happier horse riding days, yeah. And so he was the president of the Fremantle Hunt Club, and the master of the Major, Cairns Candy, became the first master of the hunt. So he knew about the dogs. And the first committee included some well-known names. One of them, probably more familiar than the others, is Harry Bowen. So the Bowen family are part of this story from the early days. But we'll be able to see when we eventually get a computer up.
Yes.
But the Fremantle Hunt Club, 1903, 1906, it could assemble quite a good mass of riders and its pack of hounds for its hunts. So they're quite popular in 1903, 1906. And then in a few years, the Fremantle Hunt Club moves its headquarters to Perth, and it becomes the WA Hunt Club. So it started off in Fremantle, moves to Perth.
There was only ever one?
There were hunt clubs in other places. Bunbury had one, various other places, but yeah,
In Perth.
there was no other one in Perth. Yeah. And one of the very special things, so I mentioned that Major Candy came with beagles. Not foxhounds, beagles.
Oh, okay.
So before fox hunting really got popular in England and in the rest of Europe, other forms of hunting popular were stag hunting and hare hunting. And you hunted these animals with beagles, and the huntsman walked behind the hounds. So, and this is before, so fox hunting comes in a bit later, and foxhounds are specially bred to hunt foxes. Beagles are a more general purpose hunting dog. And, beagles are a rather nice hunting dog. And here in Western Australia, they said beagles were the ideal hound for hunting through the dense scrub of the West Australian bushland. His small stature, like 15 inches high of beagle, enables him to find his way through places which would be inaccessible to a foxhound. So there were certain advantages to having beagles. But beagle enthusiasts... Beagle enthusiasts can think of other good reasons to have beagles. They say things like, they throw a melodious tongue, which means they sound nice. And they have wonderful noses. So So if you're looking for, reasons to prefer beagles, those are the sorts of reasons people give. But the other significant thing about hunting with beagles is if you're hunting with beagles, you don't wear red coats. The huntsmen wear green when they're hunting with beagles. So our hunt club is wearing green coats and hunting with beagles instead of wearing red coats and hunting with foxhounds. Okay. So that was a surprise to me. I didn't know any of this before I got started. So they've got... Yeah. And of course, foxes actually don't get to WA very early. They have to make their way across the Nullarbor. So to start with, they're riding to hounds and they're hunting, but they are hunting kangaroos rather than foxes. There aren't any foxes around. Later on, when foxes did arrive, the countryside still carried more kangaroos than foxes, and the hound pack wasn't very meticulous. They'd chase anything that was rather interesting. So the WA Hunt Club became unique. It was the only hunt club in the world that hunted the fox on horseback with a beagle pack. So quite extraordinary. One of the difficulties of doing this is that a kill is rarely made here. It is a poor fox that cannot outrun a beagle pack. So there weren't ideal hounds for hunting foxes with. And in fact, there were no fox kills by the hound pack until 1936. And when they did manage to kill a fox in 1936, they were so excited that they cut off the fox head and they had it stuffed. And one of the hunt officials took it home and hung it on his living room wall. And so I have a picture of the fox head. So it was very exciting. And it was considered that managing to actually kill a fox, the first fox killed by beagles in WA was in June 1936, and the kill was considered a great achievement of the club. So where did they meet? I've already said that they're meeting at the Peninsula Hotel. But prior to, they were meeting at hotels, at railway stations, at an orphanage at Canning Bridge. So that's the first one. So some of the riders and some of the hounds. So we go straight to the next one, Roger. There's the Fremantle Hunt Club, so lots of people. You might turn, those lights off. Yeah. So now you can see the Fremantle Hunt Club in its glory. So 1903, 1906, no trouble getting enthusiastic people to come along for a Saturday afternoon hunt. Next one, Roger. There we are, there's the beagle and the fox. Okay, so we can move right along from that one. And yes, so they're meeting at various places. Now, prior to 1919, the suburbs of Claremont, Canning Bridge, South Perth, Wanneroo, Leederville and Mount Lawley were the favoured haunts of the hunters. And in the 1930s, they were also meeting at the Peninsula Hotel on Saturday afternoons to go fox hunting. So the next slide. So that's where they met, but where did they ride? Well, when they met at Claremont, and part of the reason for meeting at Claremont was that Cairns Candy owned some land near Claremont Station. When they met at Claremont, sometimes they would cross the rail line a number of times in the course of their Saturday afternoon hunt. And that tells you a couple of things. It tells you that their rail line wasn't fenced off, and it also tells you that the trains can't have been running very frequently on the Fremantle line at that stage. Otherwise it just wouldn't have been a good idea. So in 1912, one hunt went from Herdsman's Lake out to Mount Scarborough at Scarborough Beach. Another 1912 hunt went from Canning Bridge to Mount Henry, Salters Point and then to the Clontarf Orphanage. Another August one that year, Ascot Hotel to Epsom and out to the Guildford Cemetery. And in 1914 they went from Canning Bridge to Como to Clontarf and the Clontarf Orphanage. By 1946 they were slightly different routes. They were going from their kennels at Belmont out to Guildford Airport. In June 1947 they went from radio station 6KY at Mount Lawley out to a poultry farm. And in 1948, in July, they went from the Greylands entrance to the showgrounds to the Cottesloe Golf Course, end of City Beach Road. So where they went in some ways was a little less important almost than how they went. So in July 1928 they said they had good galloping country where they feathered through low scrubs towards the rifle butts, full pace through open country which afforded the huge field a rare treat with the pacer cracker. So the next one. One of the reasons that they're able to keep riding to hounds in Perth suburbs for so long, so next one, Roger. I'm not going to let us have one. Okay. There are a lot of swamps. So these were areas that hadn't been built up, that were available for recreational purposes. So you see references to Muddy Lakes and Black Boy Swamp and Cork Swamp and Pommy Swamp and Williamson Swamps and a swamp near Mount Henry, and swampy country and a small swamp. And And the swamps had a few advantages. One, that they were, not heavily trafficked areas. They were available for recreational use. And the other thing is that they're actually kind to beagle feet, because this is a winter sport, so it's done in the rainy season, and you actually don't want your beagles to burn their feet on hot sand or hot surfaces, so cooler months and slightly wetter areas are fine for hunting with beagles. And it's okay for the horses and the riders. They expected to encounter quite a lot of swamp and water. So in October 1928, Field and Pack encountered and negotiated much water, after which it was found that the quarry had made good its escape by squatting on the border of the swamp. So swamps were also an escape route for some of the things that were being hunted. Okay. But you can also guess that this is a pretty dangerous activity. They're riding at a big pace. They're going through dangerous areas. There's a risk to riders and horses and hounds. They can get lost, they can fall over, they can get kicked, they can get injured by cars, they can get cold and wet, and they can get overheated. So all sorts of things can go wrong. But there are actually very few reports of injuries to riders, horses or hounds over the amount of time this club was operating. However, it doesn't mean that the riders were unaware of the dangers, but they certainly didn't see them as a deterrent. In fact, they thought it rather added to the excitement of the whole affair. So there was a columnist called Friar Tuck, and in 1912 he used to write these 2-page articles about the week's hunt by the WA Hunt Club. So in June 1912 he said, "The silent, unheeding, thickly strewn bushland through which one must wriggle like a corkscrew, dive beneath leaning boughs to avoid, or take chances of horse and self squeezing safely through closely growing eucalypts. Surely sordid city cares have no place here or friend. The chase is the thing. There are fences to negotiate, fallen trees to hazard, irrespective of what dangerous spurs might project on their outward side, swamp lands to sink into girth deep, booby holes to bring horse and rider to ground. These and many more excitements add zest to the sport and pulsation to the blood canal." So, which is obviously very important. So by 1946 they were getting a little less florid about the things, and the report says, "Another of the dogs continually lost himself, and one of the hounds was injured by a car. Nor were the only mishaps among the beagles. 2 riders fell, someone was kicked in the knee, and everyone was drenched. But it seemed both participants and spectators enjoyed the opening of the hunt." So even the spectators are happy with these sorts of things. In May 1948, 30th of May, only 2 minor incidents occurred during the afternoon. Miss Bennett's horse tripped in a rabbit hole and threw her, and Miss Renshaw's horse slipped on the road and came down, bringing her to the ground. Both riders received only a slight shaking. So you can see that there were intrepid women riding to hounds, being undeterred by all of these hazards and the conditions under which they're riding. Back to that previous one, Roger. And it looks pretty wet and muddy there, doesn't it? And some of these ladies were riding side saddle as well. So you've got to admire them. But it's also interesting that this was really one of the very few mixed-gender recreational activities that they could participate in. So they're there, and it's there are some gendered rituals associated with hunting, like the first lady on the scene of a kill is presented with the tail of the victim, but if they don't kill anything, that's not much of a trouble. And so in 1912, there are single and married women taking part in the hunt. Miss O'Wagner, Miss Enmore, Mrs. Burgess. A couple of weeks later, Mrs. Burgess, Mrs. White, Mrs. Kerwin, Miss McGuire. In August that year, Miss McGuire, Mrs. E.J. Stewart, Mrs. Gorman. May 1914, Mrs. Fitzwilliam, Mrs. Connor, Mrs. Thomas, and many others whose names I do not know. So they're part of the hunt, they're participating, they're going through the whole of the ride and all of the environmental hazards you encounter. But there are some distinctions being made. So you get a report in 1948. Men in coats of hunter's green with red lapels and white breeches, and women wearing tailored black coats, black bowler hats and white breeches provided a picturesque picture for the opening meet of the WA Hunt Club yesterday. So it's not quite even. They don't get to wear the nice green coats. Okay? But, and in terms of the management of the Hunt Club, well, they had the governor as patron at this stage. The governors were men. And they had an all-male committee, as far as I can see, certainly from around 1912 into the 1930s. And then they got a few female secretaries. And also there were the hunt officials. So one of the jobs at the hunt is to function as the whip. There are two of these. And their job is to prevent the pack from dividing when the hounds can find more than one scent. The hounds don't know which way to go. The huntsman in charge of the hunt will decide which one to pay attention to, and then the whip's job is to keep the hounds focused on that scent. Don't let them deviate, don't let them get lost, don't let them get confused. Now, during World War II, Mrs. Atwell Jr. has acted as first whip to her husband, and in accepting this position, Mrs. Atwell became the first woman whip in the club's history. So it took a while for the women to work their way into some of these jobs. But the next one, Roger? Yeah, go back to the all ages one. So apart from being a fairly inclusive sport, the one before, in terms of gender, it was also fairly inclusive in terms of age. So in the early reports, there are obviously some young boys, Master So-and-so, riding to the hunt. But this young girl at the top, this is Edna Robinson, and she was the youngest member of the Hunt Club. She joined at the age of 4, or someone joined her up at the age of 4. And she's shown here at a meet in North Perth. She's actually in Charles Street, near where the old North Perth Hotel used to be. And she's on her pony Toby. And she rides that pony to and from school every day. And after the meeting, she was going to ride Toby back to the family dairy farm in Main Street, Osborne Park. So this is a pretty competent little girl. On this occasion, she's not looking very happy, but that was apparently because she was made to carry a whip, and she didn't like that idea. And so that's why she's got this rather disapproving expression on her face. Because it had this welcoming of all ages, and because it was a mixed gender club, you could have a situation of this proud father riding to hounds with his 4 daughters. Now, there weren't many other sports that, father and daughter teams could participate in. And the picture further on the right, I said the Bowen family stayed connected to the Hunt Club for a long time. So that's, I think that's Frank Bowen and his daughter Susan. And that's with their horse Roger at the opening of meet of the WA Hunt Club at Ascot in Belmont on a Saturday afternoon. So it was a fairly inclusive, interesting, exciting activity to engage in. So if you were a person who liked to ride and liked to ride fast, liked variety, this was the sport for you. So the next one, Roger. Yeah, as I said, the women were more or less equal, but they did have a ladies' auxiliary, and yes, the ladies' auxiliary did seem to organise a number of meals, like barbecue lunches and other things like that. So in 1948, the ladies' auxiliary will provide a barbecue luncheon for members and friends. This is Emily Pellow, and at one stage she was the president of the ladies' auxiliary. And she's a pretty impressive person, so she was excited about being president of this, and her entry in the Australian Dictionary of Biography records this as one of her important affiliations. It says that this is probably something worth belonging to and probably extremely well organised. Right there, she's not dressed for riding. She's dressed up for a ball to celebrate the centenary of colonisation, and she's wearing a costume that belongs to the 1870s. She would have been much happier in riding clothes. Apparently Emily didn't have much sense of fashion, but was always impeccably turned out as a rider. And she was a keen horsewoman. She'd won championship equestrian events at Sydney, Melbourne, Launceston and the Perth Royal Shows. At Perth she donated the coveted Emily Pellow Prize for the best equestrian turnout. And with a female companion she made several long rides in New South Wales and Western Australia, and recording her experiences, which included a ride of 1,000-mile, a return journey from Mildura to Adelaide, and then rides down to Augusta. In the 1920s she was a columnist for the West Australian, and under the pen name Ixia, she inaugurated the Women's Interest column, and in answers to queries she addressed correspondence problems about cookery, dress, health and other matters. And she was very fond of flowers and wildflowers, liked flower arrangements, but was very opposed to indiscriminate picking of wildflowers, and was an early and active member of the WA Naturalist Club. And she wrote her book, West Australian Orchids, which came out in 1921, Wildflowers of Western Australia. was acclaimed as the first book in the English language dealing with Western Australia's extensive and diverse flora. So she had creative skills and a deep botanical knowledge. In 1939, she collaborated with the state botanist, who was her former protégé, to compile a brochure for the West Australian Government Tourist Bureau. And she did wildfowl paintings and landscape watercolours. And some of her pictures were acquired by government departments, and in 1938 her prints were used as Christmas cards by the Premier. So she just about did die in the saddle. She died of heart failure on 15 April 1941 while riding her horse Snowdrift home from an Easter meeting at the Women's Riding Club at Waterman's Bay. And at that stage she was 64. So she was a keen rider. And the next year she and her husband Theodore had no children. So her husband gave 400 wildflower paintings to the University of WA. And at the handing over ceremony, the governor extolled Mrs. Pellow as a writer, an artist and a humanitarian. So this is the quality of the people who are running the ladies' exhibit. So she's impressive. So the next one, Roger. But it's also a spectator sport. So the opening of the hunt season was quite a social occasion. What you're seeing there is the 1953 season opening. You can see there are marquees, there are lots of cars, there's quite a crowd in attendance. In 1914, the members of the WA Hunt Club invited their friends to meet them at Canning Bridge for the throw-off. And they had 2 launches chartered to meet the visitors who had accepted to enjoy the beautiful run up the Swan River. So one launch moved off from the William Street jetty, the other waited for a few minutes and then steamed away from Canning Bridge with about 50 guests aboard. And the Canning openings have always been popular. Saturdays quite eclipsed any of its predecessors. And even the most ardent supporter of the hunt could hardly have expected such a magnificent commencement for the season 1914. The members of the Automobile Club had been invited to attend, and the presence of so many of their best cars made a most imposing spectacle. So in 1914 the horses are normal enough and the cars are a novelty. By 1953 things had changed around a bit. Okay, next one, Roger. But they didn't just hunt, they had a mix of other activities. They also ran races. So the picture is of a WA Hunt Club meeting at the Ascot Racecourse in October 1910. And they had a program of races for hunters, not for standard thoroughbred horses. So they had a field of 16 starters to the Hunt Club plate at Canning Park. The annual race meeting will also be a huge success. And those race meetings were also financially very important to the club. So in 1914, the balance sheet showed the profit for the year to be £298. The profit on the annual race meeting was £526. And the membership roll was 136. So by running these race meetings, they generated quite a lot of funds that could cover a lot of their other expenses. They also competed at the Perth show. Splendidly mounted club members competed in ring events at the show, and they also competed in polo. At their 1934 AGM of the Hunt Club, it was pointed out that the present crack Melbourne polo team was that which was formed by the Melbourne Hunt Club. As a result of the discussion, it is probable that a team will be formed from the WA Hunt Club to partake in the games of the next polo season. Well, it was and it did, and they had involvement with polo for many years after that. Okay, the next one. Now we'll get to some non-horse activities. Yes, they were also into whoopee and balls. And I'll just read you that first one about horses and yachts, because it says, on Monday night, the Hunt Club people abandoned their usual haunts and foregathered at the Freshwater Bay clubhouse and made whoopee among the yachts and motorboats, dancing and sitting around until very late. It was delightfully cooled down by the river, so that the men, formal creatures, didn't feel too stifled in their glad rags. But you can also see people happily dressing up in their glad rags for the balls. Now those balls would have 500 to 700 people attending them. They were quite glamorous occasions. They're in big venues, including the Government House ballroom. So the report on one of them says, Thursday evening last, the members of the WA Hunt Club stepped the stately measure of the ballroom. Brilliant in diffusion, light streamed from 100 electric lamps, lending silver glow to a scene of beauty, while floating arms gave soft warmth, and umbrageous palms and tropic evergreens created a languid atmosphere, picturesquely, socially and financially a triumph. So they'd often have the ball would be in show week, so they get quite a lot of people from the country centres, the country clubs coming along as well. So the next one, Roger. So they're pretty well part of the establishment. The governor's the patron. The governor tends to come along to the opening meet. They've got these very cherished links with England, so that when they need to fresh blood for breeding hounds, they go to England to get hounds and import directly from there. They're a patriotic group. They raise quite a lot of money for during the war for patriotic causes. In 1948, their barbecue lunch funds were going to be donated to the Food for Britain appeal. They participated in the Perth show, and in 1949 there was the grand and unusual spectacle of a Hunt Club Guard of Honour for the club patron, the Governor Sir James Mitchell, was seen at the Royal Show. Splendidly mounted club members competed in renegades. So by 1932, the Hunt Club was a flourishing institution. It was a pretty sight at an opening meeting recently, a big crowd present, many being sons and daughters of old amateur riders. At the WA Hunt Club's opening meeting, those who were mounted total 107. Last Saturday, over 80 rode to hounds. Hunting in this state helps to provide horses for flat racing, so it was considered helpful to the whole horse sport area. So the next one, Roger. But it started declining in newsworthiness. So in 1912, you're getting these double-page accounts of the Saturday afternoon hunt. That stops. The race meetings start getting more coverage than the hunt meetings. The balls are better reported than the hunts. You get single paragraph rather than several columns by the 1940s. You do get captioned newspaper photographs by the 1940s. But it certainly has enthusiasts for the sport. Someone's writing, the pleasures of sitting on the horse, rein in hand, a sinuous, nervous steed beneath one, a pack of well-trained hounds relentlessly hanging to a scent. So they're really enjoying that. So it's all looking like they should have a bright future ahead of them. So we're going to cut across. Quick fast forward into the 1986. Roger, next slide. Not going to do it. Anyway, so in 1986, they're less suburban. They're actually meeting for their Hunt Club meets are being held at the National Equestrian Centre out in the Swan Valley. So they've moved away from the suburbs. You can see they've still got a good number of horses and riders there. And you can also see they've now moved into red coats. And if you look more closely at the hounds, you'd see that they've also moved into foxhounds. So there have been some very big changes. And there have also been some quite big changes to the club fortune. So this is 1986. And I actually have a friend who was part of this riding to hounds with this group in 1986. The celebrity attending the opening meeting isn't the governor anymore. It's actually the British comedian Jimmy Edwards. He was out there. And you can see some ladies are still prepared to turn up at a Hunt Club meeting and ride side saddle. So if you're going to be jumping over fences, that seems like a great difficulty. But this is impressive because this is 96 and they've got all of these people and all of these hounds assembled. It's all looking very flourishing. But the previous year, 1985, they were so short of funds that the club was in recess. They didn't have any hunts, no hunt meetings at all in 1985. So what had gone wrong? Next slide. They've clearly been a resilient club. They've been in recess once before, during World War II. They abandoned hunting during the war and disposed of the pack of hounds except for a few hounds. And Hunt Club members who remained took part in gymkhanas and other functions to raise funds for patriotic purposes. But they were one of the first hunt clubs in Australia to recommence its activities after the end of World War II. And the Hunt Club ball came back to the social calendar, the barbecues and the weekend club trips were organised once more. But some things never came back. The railways could no longer offer them special trains to take club members and their mounts to country centres for a round of functions and a hunt over the surrounding countryside. Nowadays, members have to be content with the weekend at Yanchep and horses taken in floats. So it was becoming a little less glamorous. They said that they'd reduced their hound pack during the war years. They then started to build the pack up again, and then they, distemper killed all but 2 of their hounds. So at that stage, I think that really helped change the move from beagles to foxhounds. If they were going to re-equip with new hounds, what sort of hounds would they get? So there's a bit of discussion at that point. And of course, sometimes they were resilient in the fact that if you couldn't find a fox or any animal to chase, you could always have a drag hunt. So someone would drag something strongly smelling aniseed, create a trail that the hounds could follow. Now, some riders actually prefer drag hunts. One, there's no risk of any animals being killed. And two, it means that the ride is much more free-flowing. There's no need to stop while the hounds try and find the scent. So you can keep on, it's continuous action, continuous flow. So there's a lot to be said for the drag hunt. But the real trouble that they had, and they were always worried about running out of places to hunt. You can see they've had to move out to the equestrian centre. But they were worried about this for a very long time. They were worried about this from 1914. And in 1914, the chairman called attention to the necessity for securing fresh hunting fields. He said the club used to have a wide area, but now they were restricted to the Canning and Belmont districts. The secretary said that the club would soon have to go further out into the country by means of special trains. So this might have been panicking a little bit too early, because in 1918, much of Mount Lawley, Inglewood and Maylands were still covered in sparse bush. So they were a place, and there was the swamps. And in 1948, people could still go for a run in the bush at Belmont. But by 1950, most of the hunts were being carried out in the bush of the foothills of the Darling Ranges or the coastal plain northwest of Mount Yokine. Horses and hounds are transported to meets and floats, and a special cage utility truck. And the throw-off, the releasing of hounds to find the scent, is, wherever possible, made well clear of built-up areas. So the suburbs had changed. They were now less horse-friendly, less hound-friendly, far more car-friendly. And so the hunt club was really getting squeezed out from the 1950s and 1960s onwards. So you can see they managed to revive their club in 1986. So if we go to the next slide. Yeah, so it's no longer such a good fit for Perth. And what happens, other hunt clubs are also having the same problem. So in 1999, all of the hunt clubs in WA combine. And they create a new hound pack, a new hunt club called Brook Hunt. And they move out, their hound pack is now based at Bullsbrook. So a good way outside the city. So that's 1999. By 2005, even that was getting a bit too built up, so they're now out at Bindoon. And there is only one hunt club, one pack of hounds in WA. Now that's quite different. You'll find more hounds and hunt clubs still in New South Wales and Victoria. But in WA there is now only the one, and the WA Hunt Club has ceased for all practical purposes to exist in 1999. But they had managed for a long time before that. So when I started looking at these people, I said I was just curious about why a hunt club would be meeting at the Peninsula Hotel in Maylands, and in what way would that make sense. But having looked at them this far, I can now think of a lot more reasons why you should study this interestingly suburban hunt club. One, because it tells you a lot about the changing nature and the leisure value and the use of suburban landscapes, that they were horse and hound friendly for a long time. It tells you about changing social and cultural values. It certainly gives you new insights into women's active recreation and their capacity to take on management roles in a mixed gender club. And it really highlights the need for sporting clubs to keep adapting to changing environments and values. And they did try, but in the end it was all changing a bit too fast. So they had to continue the sport, they had to really end their club's functioning, combine with all the others to make this new hunt club that employs, it still has packs of hounds, employs professional huntsmen now. So it's nice that they still exist, and a bit sad that they are no longer part of suburban life. So that's it. So thank you, and if there are any questions.
Wow, so much that I didn't know about. Obscure hunt club somewhere up in Bullsbrook, but all that history with regard to that. Thank you for actually bringing that up. All your notes and so forth, I mean, there's nearly a sizable book with regard to that. And you've researched all that from different areas?
Mainly from Perth. I haven't yet gone into the State Library, where they do have hunt club records and newsletters. So that would tell me a little bit more, and I would be more certain of some things than I am at the moment, where I'm just working from what got published in newspapers. And on the images I can see at the State Library, I think the little girl image was from the city of Stirling. So there are photographic records which have been really helpful for this.
Gosh.
Do we know how often they used to meet at the old peninsula?
I can look that one up, but it wasn't their absolute favourite meeting place, but it was one of the many.
From what I can remember, because I found out that Mr. Wright of that sign next to the Lyric Lane,
Right stores, yeah.
Wright stores, right, whatever, produce merchants, he rode to hounds with his wife, and they were meeting at the peninsula from about 1930 to about 1934 or 35, once a year. Then they go out to Belmont.
Well, Belmont was where their kennels and their hounds were. So Belmont was a regular meeting place. That was their headquarters.
But from the peninsula, they'd head out across the golf course. And sometimes they'd head up to Guildford, depending on what they
And of
wanted
course
to
we
do.
know that the bottom end of the peninsula wasn't terribly built up for a long
No.
time. So, but it said, getting from the Peninsula Hotel across Guildford Road with your pack of hounds and horses. It sounds like a bit of a challenge to me. But I said the traffic and the horses were probably reasonably accommodating with each other at that time.
Louise, I'd like to really thank you, and as we usually do, what we did forget one time, with regard to the presentation, would you like a red, white or a chocolate?
Oh, this time I had enough sense to consult my husband beforehand. He told me to take the chocolate.
Oh. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I just say a little aside? I'm thrilled to bits because that's taken me right back to when I was a teenager, and I used to ride to hounds in a place in Warwickshire, but I rode to hounds on my bike. And they took off along all these little country roads. They'd take up over the fields, and I'd say, now, I think they're going that way, so I'd pedal up. And of course they didn't, they went the other way, and so after about half an hour I was lost them, but at least I started, you know, I rode to hounds, which was lovely. And also the lady of the manor, which my father worked for, she rode to hounds and had a nice stables, and I got a weekend job there when I was at school, when I was at high school, and my job, I think, wasn't terribly super duper. I used to clean the tack, I used to sweep the yard, and I used to pick up the horses' poo by hand. Because they were so well strawed that you couldn't get a fork in. So if anybody wants a lesson as to how to horses poo by hand without getting your hands dirty, come and see me. Yeah, it was good fun. It was good. But take me right back. I'm going to keep thinking of things, you know.
Well, actually, while you're saying that, the friend I had who rode to hounds with this one in 1986, she took up riding to hounds as a working class Londoner. Because in her suburb there was a livery stable run by a retired army person, and he got them riding, and they would organise them to go out to the country and take part in the fox hunt. So I was most surprised to find that she had a fox hunting past. She said that some of the people, of the country people, would look down their noses a bit at these people from London, but she said most of the ones who were doing that weren't very good riders and they didn't stay very long, so you didn't have to pay any attention.
I mean, even today, because my nephew is actually a huntsman with one of the hunts in the UK, and today they get people on bikes, they get people on cars, and as well as the ones on horses.
Yes.
And as well as the ones on legs, there's another whole story about the Hash House Harriers, which is an international organisation.
Oh yes.
So during after the war, all those soldiers that were posted all around the world wanted to continue. What could they do? Well, they'd send a guy off with some flour to mark some trails, and they'd all blow horns and carry on and chase them. And at the end of it, when it's all finished, lots of drinking and yahooing and carrying on, having a great time. So they'll find a way.